What's going on, guys? Back with another video, and today I want to be talking about a movie that I wasn't going to review on this channel simply because there's a lot of reviews on this movie in general. It's a Nolan movie that makes it even more of a bigger movie to talk about. But what I've been seeing with this movie now 3 weeks out is the amount of backlash towards it in terms of adaptation, maybe certain portrayals of actors and how they were presented. And accuracy. I think that's the big word here, accuracy, which I found interesting. As someone who's read the book several times, it's one of my favorite books of all time, so I've always wanted a bigger adaptation of this on the screen, and we had never gotten it. I know there were rumblings of talks with this movie possibly coming out in 2016 with Hugh Jackman in the lead. It never really happened. We've gotten smaller depictions of this, obviously, in the 1954 version with Kirk Douglas. Then we had a TV version in '97, which is one I grew up watching. And then even last year we had a very small scale film called The Return with Ray Fiennes and Julie Binoche. And then this year, obviously, we have the Nolan take. And this one has gotten quite the amount of backlash. And going in, seeing this the first time, I was taken aback because I was so used to the source material and seeing the magical elements of the book and how the gods play into it, and just certain moments that didn't happen in the movie that were in the book, because the portrayal of a certain character, particularly Odysseus, he's treated differently in the movie than he is in the book. Keyword here is that it's an adaptation, and while I wasn't super thrilled with some of these changes the first going, the second going, I actually acknowledged them, that these are adaptations, that this is Nolan's portrayal of this story, and with what he's telling in that story, with how he's telling it and modernizing and making it fit in today's day and age, it actually works pretty well. I do like the darker tone of this. Would I have liked more things in the book to be portrayed in this movie? Yes, but now we're getting even more fantastical, and this is not what Nolan wanted to tell. Obviously, him not trying to deal with special effects is another thing. What's interesting is one of the translators of this book, which is many, was going against this movie, and her name was Emily Wilson. And rightfully so. I can understand her displeasure because she translated the book and she put in a lot of effort and energy, and this is so much, almost her baby kind of situation, and I can see her frustration with it. With other people, I'm not sharing this this feeling, because people go in, they spend 3 hours, maybe they read the book, there's no even guarantee they read the book, and they come out and they start spewing all this anger, and they didn't get this, they didn't get that, and they're criticizing it for being historically inaccurate. Meanwhile, they're enjoying all these other movies that are historically inaccurate, that have terrible accents, that have geographical locations that don't fit the story. And we have people, that love mythology that are going against this movie because it's not what they were expecting a mythology tale to be, but they're over here enjoying the Percy Jackson series, which has a bunch of issues and is extremely historically inaccurate, and also modernizing it and trying to fit in today's day and age and make it fit for younger people, especially people just getting into reading. So the people that are not authors or translators of this, I'm really kind of confused why they're bashing this movie. They might dislike elements of this movie, but to bash it is kind of crazy, because when I read this book, I reread it. I remember reading this, I forget his name, but that was my entry in it. It was like almost a shortened version of the story made to just attract younger readers to the story, and that was my introduction to this book. I remember reading a very condensed version in middle school of this, and I obviously remember reading the Penguins edition. I believe it was by Bernard Knox. So I never actually read the edition translated by Emily Wilson, but I recently reread another translation. This came from Barnes and Noble, so it had very nice binding, and I'm like immediately attracted. But again, it was translated by Samuel Butler. So I don't know how many. There's been countless translations of this story, and that's the interesting part. People come at this story as if it's historical, as if it's fact, when this is a work of fiction. And not only that, this is a story that's been written, not even written, let's talk about that. This is a story that's coming from 800 BC. And this was during this time, there was no writing. There was writing on things that they had to keep inventory of, maybe some political stuff. It was very cut and dry. Nobody really told stories. The stories that we get nowadays that were written are really personal diary entries that are now published as literary works by Marcus Aurelius or Socrates or Plato. These were private journal entries. I mean, we talk about a book like Meditations. It's a very popular book and people read this all the time. Even this is translated, because keep in mind, all of these texts were originally in Greek. This is a dead language. So if I'm going to enjoy something like this, it's going to be translated regardless of which edition I get. So on top of the fact that it's translated, we're going to a story that was never written down, that has been passed on to generation from one person to the next. I don't know if you've played that game where people are standing in a line and there's maybe like 20 people, if not more, and you whisper something to one person on the front of a line, and then they pass on the message from one person to the next, and then the last person in that line has to pretty much say what you were saying at the very beginning of that line. And 9 times out of 10, the sentence that you said in the very beginning is different from what you said at the very end of that line. A couple words here and there, if you're lucky. This is maybe 20 people in the same room that have a different sentence than what you originally started with. We're talking about something that was passed down from person to person, somebody that was more theatrical maybe, somebody that was more dry, maybe somebody that was more biased towards one character. These were stories that were passed down before it was written down, and eventually someone wrote it down, and then that was transcribed from Greek to the language now. And then so many people have their own interpretations. We experienced this quite a bit. I remember reading in college a book called The Epic of Gilgamesh. It was a pretty popular college read in English literature class. And that was a story that, once again, was written down on stone. And the stones were discovered, and they were in such bad shape that words were missing, and people had to fill in the gaps. And so many interpretations have completely different meanings and interpretations because there's just chunks that are missing the actual meaning of the text. Nobody really knows. Just like in the Odyssey, nobody even actually knows if a Trojan horse existed. Nobody actually knows if Homer even existed. I mean, the whole thing with the horse is probably mythological, hence the word myth. It was considered by some people that there was an earthquake during this time in modern day in Turkey. And what people were hearing was actually what they were interpreting the earthquake, and they thought Poseidon was angry with them and he was charging at them, and he was charging at them with horses or whatever. And this is where that has evolved into the story that it is now. Obviously, the story sounds so much better when you have a Trojan horse and, you know, soldiers hiding and now they're killing people, and it sounds more epic, obviously. Going back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, we had so many different interpretations because there was missing pieces to that puzzle. So I read that edition that that was, I forget which edition it was, but this was the one that was given to us in college. And then I remember reading another version. It was a Babylonian version of that, also translated. And it was vastly different. It was different in portraying the monster in that story. And we've had that, maybe that was an inspiration for other authors. We've had that in so many different instances, particularly Beowulf. We see a character presented a certain way in Beowulf, and then we have an almost Guillermo del Toro approach with looking at monsters. And then we read a book by John Gardner, and he has a book called Grendel. And that is a very sympathetic look at this monster, and maybe we're portraying him a different way, and maybe he should be looked at this way. Everybody has their own adaptation and how they see these stories, especially these ancient stories and how they're written. None of it is fact. Okay, so people come out with this story in terms of, well, he said mom and dad, well, he mentioned the Bronze Age. Very much nitpicking the heck out of this story. Does not really change the story. The adaptation part makes more sense than all these other things that they're picking at. So with Nolan, he wanted a more war and trauma based story, and it was almost not as fantastical as the story. But we haven't gotten an interpretation of the story in 2 decades. If someone wants a direct book adaptation, by all means follow up with it if you think you can. It's a big budget movie. I don't see anybody else tackling it. Last time we got it was with Troy, and again, you know, nobody's picking apart that movie for inconsistencies and inaccuracies. We had movie The Return last year. It was a very underwhelming watch because it skipped a lot of things. It skipped basically 2/3 of the story. And it was a very dry account. It almost felt like a copy and paste job. It was just more conversations and just slower moments. And that's the problem. If you wanted a copy and paste job, by all means, we have plenty of those that already exist with Disney's side. They like to copy and paste with their live action adaptations. We had a Moana movie in 2016. Look at that, we have a live action movie already. This is what makes this story fresh. This is what makes it more interesting, is these different interpretations. This is not Homer's interpretation of the Odyssey. This is Christopher Nolan's interpretation. The Harry Potter books are pretty much different than what we saw in the movies that we grew up watching, or at least I did. I still love the movies, and I still love the books. Should that series be picked apart? I mean, now we have a TV series in development. So maybe in the future, the Odyssey gets another take, and maybe that is going to be more faithful and more mythological and fantastical like people are expecting. But for what we got with the story that it's set in and what it's focusing on and modernizing and making it fit to today's day and age, whether it's with casting, whether it's with the actual trauma and kind of making it seem more real, I thought it worked really well. It's a movie that feels epic. There's a lot that went into making this movie. I mean, it's the first movie in 70mm IMAX. The techniques that went with the cameras, and then just they made woodwinds to fit this time period. They tried so much to make this feel like the time period. There are some inconsistencies, you can say. They never drug me out of the movie. I had some issues with sound design, but that was mostly a Dolby experience problem. But in general, I thought this was a really well-crafted film and one of the best movies I've seen this year. I've seen this movie twice. I plan to watch it a 3rd time in theaters. I think the performances are really good. The score fits the film very well. The limited special effects and practical effects are extremely well done. And the twist that we do get with this as he made the changes actually service and fit this movie extremely well. So if we put aside all the backlash and all the hate for this movie and acknowledge it as an adaptation of a story that was adapted even before it was even made into a movie, I think we can appreciate the story for what it is, what it's telling, and there's just a lot of haters out there, and I don't think it's warranted. So those are my thoughts on The Odyssey. I think it's a really well-made film, even as a book lover. I do appreciate the film. I do think it's a great movie. First time around, definitely a frustrating watch, but if you watch this a second time and a third time and you kind of put aside your differences with it being a faithful adaptation to what you were reading, it's actually a really well-made film. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Please do hit that like and thumbs up down below. Please do comment your thoughts about this movie and about my take on this down below. And as always guys, I will see you in a future video. See you guys.